Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video. Wishing you all good health and peace. The sun had barely risen over the misty hills when Diep set out, her bamboo basket heavy with sweet potatoes strapped to her back. The dirt path wound through the village, red and slick from last night's rain, each step a quiet rhythm against the morning's hush. Somewhere in the distance a rooster crowed, and the faint hum of a waterfall carried on the breeze. Diep's breath misted in the cool air, but her heart felt heavier than the load she carried. Today was different. Today, James's father had returned, and with him came questions she wasn't sure she could answer. She paused by the stream that cut through the valley, its waters clear and cold, tumbling down from the highlands where James's land stretched wide. 5 hectares of earth he'd once called their future. Diep knelt, splashing water on her face, the chill waking her senses. She could still hear his voice from months ago, standing right here, his eyes bright with dreams. This land, Diep, it's ours. We'll build something here, you and me. She'd smiled then, her heart full of a hope as fragile as the wildflowers along the path. But now that land was for sale, traded for money she didn't understand, and James's father was here, his shadow looming over their promises. Diep adjusted her basket and continued toward the market. The village was waking. Smoke curled from thatched roofs, children laughed as they chased chickens, and the scent of boiling rice lingered in the air. She loved these mornings, the way they wrapped her in familiarity, grounding her even when her thoughts drifted to places she couldn't reach. But today her steps felt slower, as if the earth itself were pulling her back, whispering doubts she tried to bury. At the market, she spread a worn mat under the shade of a banyan tree, and arranged her sweet potatoes in neat piles. 10,000 dong a kilo, she called, her voice clear despite the knot in her chest. The potatoes were small, their skins dusted with earth, but sweet as honey when boiled. She dug them herself, hands stained red from the soil, each one a small victory against the long days. Passers-by stopped, some haggling, others smiling as they filled their bags. An old woman, her face lined like the bark of an ancient tree, picked up 2 kilos and pressed a crumpled bill into Diep's hand. "You work hard, child," she said, her eyes kind. "Don't let the world wear you down." Diep nodded, but the words settled heavy in her heart. Hard work she could bear. Her shoulders were strong, her hands calloused from years of planting and harvesting. But the weight of uncertainty of James's father's arrival was something else. She'd seen him yesterday, stepping out of a car at the village's edge, his hair streaked with silver, his gaze sharp enough to cut through stone. He'd spoken to James about the land, his questions clipped and precise, how much it was worth, why it was being sold. Then his eyes had turned to her, lingering just long enough to make her feel small. "What's her schooling?" he'd asked, as if she weren't standing there, her basket still warm from the morning's load. "What's her family like?" She'd wanted to answer, to tell him she'd only studied until 5th grade, that her home was a bamboo shack clinging to the hillside, that her parents had long since faded into the earth. But her tongue had stayed still, pinned by the fear that her truth wouldn't be enough. James had squeezed her hand, his touch steady, but even that couldn't quiet the storm in her chest. What did his father see when he looked at her? A girl too simple for his son's ambitions? A shadow that didn't belong in their world of contracts and capital? The market buzzed around her, voices overlapping, the clink of coins and rustle of plastic bags a familiar song. A man dropped his satchel in his haste, and Diep darted after him, her basket bouncing against her back. "Uncle, your bag!" she called, holding it out. He turned, gratitude softening his weathered face, and tried to press a few bills into her hand. "No, no," she said, shaking her head, a shy smile breaking through. "Keep it for your family." She returned to her mat, her heart a little lighter, as if kindness could mend the cracks she felt growing inside. By noon the sun burned high, and Diep's piles of potatoes had dwindled. She wiped sweat from her brow, her thoughts drifting to James. He was at the foot of the mountain, showing the land to a buyer, his voice steady as he described the waterfall that fed it, the soil that drank deeply even in dry seasons. She'd overheard him last night, talking of prices and profits, numbers that danced beyond her grasp. He'd asked her to join his company once, to leave the fields for a desk, but she'd laughed, her hands brushing dirt from her skirt. "I'm no good with papers, James," she'd said. "I belong here with the earth, with people." He'd smiled, but she'd seen the flicker of worry in his eyes, as if he feared she'd never fit into the life he was building. A voice broke her thoughts. "Diep." She looked up to find James standing there, his shirt rumpled, his face taut with something unspoken. "My father wants to see you," he said, his words careful, like stones placed on a fragile bridge. Her stomach twisted, but she met his gaze, searching for the warmth she'd once found there. It was still there, but shadowed like a fire banked against a coming storm. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, his hand brushing hers, but before he could answer, a customer called and she turned away, her heart pounding. The afternoon passed in a blur of sales and small talk, but Diep's mind lingered on James's words. What did his father want? To judge her? To warn her away? She thought of the land, of the dreams they'd woven under starlit skies, dreams of a home with a sturdy roof, of children running through fields they'd planted together. Would those dreams survive his father's scrutiny, or would they crumble like dry earth underfoot? As dusk settled, Diep packed her empty basket and started home. The path was quieter now, the village settling into evening's embrace. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the air carried the scent of charcoal and simmering broth. Her shack came into view, its bamboo walls weathered but steadfast, a refuge she'd built with her own hands. Hockey, her little dog, bounded out to meet her, his tail a blur of joy. She laughed, kneeling to scratch his ears, the sound easing the ache in her chest. Inside, she lit the stove, the flames casting shadows on the walls. She sliced potatoes, their sweetness filling the air as they boiled, and set a pot of rice to simmer. Hockey curled up by the hearth, his eyes following her every move. She sat for a moment, her gaze drifting to the book on the table, a worn primer she'd borrowed from the village school. She'd been trying to read it, stumbling over words that felt like riddles, hoping to learn enough to stand taller in James's world. But tonight the pages blurred, her thoughts tangled with questions she couldn't voice. She remembered James's father's arrival, the way he'd stood by the car, his presence filling the air like a storm gathering strength. He'd asked about her, his tone neither cruel nor kind, but heavy with expectation. James had defended her, his voice firm, but she'd seen the tension in his shoulders, the weight of a son caught between duty and desire. Did he believe in her truly? Or was she just a chapter in his story? One he'd close when the world demanded more? The moon rose, its light slipping through the cracks in the walls, painting the floor in silver. Diep stepped outside, Hockey at her heels, and looked up at the sky. The stars were sharp, each one a pinprick of hope, but they felt far away tonight. She thought of her mother long gone, who'd taught her to plant by the moon's phases, to trust the earth when all else failed. "You're stronger than you know," her mother had said, her hands rough but gentle. Diep clung to those words now, letting them anchor her against the tide of doubt. She returned inside, her movements slow, deliberate. She ate alone, the rice warm but tasteless, and fed Hockey scraps from her plate. The book lay untouched, its pages a silent challenge. She wanted to learn, to grow, not just for James but for herself, for the girl who'd once dreamed of more than baskets and fields. But what if her dreams weren't enough? What if James's father looked at her and saw only lack of schooling, lack of wealth, lack of everything his son deserved? Sleep came fitfully, broken by the rustle of leaves and Hockey's soft whines. In her dreams she saw James standing by the stream, his hand outstretched, but when she reached for it, he faded, leaving only the sound of water rushing over stones. She woke to dawn's first light, her body aching but her resolve unbroken. She rose, fed Hockey, and packed her basket once more. The market awaited, the village awaited, life awaited. As she stepped onto the path, the mist curling around her like a shawl, she thought of James's father. Today she might face him, his questions, his judgment. She thought of James, of the love that had rooted her here, fragile but fierce. Would his father see it, the strength in her hands, the fire in her heart? Or would he turn away, taking James with him? Diep didn't know. The path stretched ahead, winding through hills that held both her past and her future. She shifted her basket, its weight familiar, grounding. Today she'd sell her potatoes, smile at strangers, and carry on. But in her heart, a question lingered, soft as moonlight, sharp as stone. Would love be enough to hold them together? Or would it slip through her fingers like water from the stream? The answer wasn't here, not yet. It lay somewhere beyond the market, beyond the fields, in a moment she couldn't yet see. For now Diep walked on, her steps steady, her heart a quiet drumbeat against the morning's song.